Hello there, people, and welcome to another episode of Flight Review. My name is Ray. Thank you so much for joining me. I am here today to give my spoiler-filled thoughts on the most recent entry into the MCU, the 36th MCU movie, Thunderbolts, which I will admit I did need a day or two to process fully what I had seen on Friday. I saw this movie in theaters on Friday after work, so my streak is intact. I have seen all 36 MCU films in theaters initially, as they released, and this one definitely was a surprise. I have a decent amount to talk about with respect to this particular film, but of course, before diving headfirst into my thoughts on Thunderbolts, I do want to remind everybody here that this show and my other shows can be found at theflightcast.com or wherever you get your podcasts. The Flightcast is available all over the place, including YouTube. The Flightcast YouTube page itself is where you can find the postings of these episodes, or wherever you get your podcasts, whether it's Spotify, whether it's Pandora, whether it's Apple Podcasts, anywhere you can find it. And in addition to this show, there is the main show, The Flightcast, that normally drops on Mondays, where we talk about all manner of movies, TV, and other sorted media and whatnot. And we're going to have some discussion about Marvel this upcoming week with respect to the main show for sure. We've had episodes of Flight Box, which usually pops up on Wednesdays. We're taking a bit of a break on that because the Andor schedule is just a little bit heavy. So in a couple of weeks, we're going to do a recap episode of Andor, talking about Andor Season 2. I have been watching it live, though, and I have been keeping up on it, if you will. So that means that feedback with respect to Andor Season 2 is still fair game for the show on Fridays, which is Friday Flight, the listener feedback show that we do, where all of you send in your emails and your posts and whatnot, talking about whatever movies, TV, and other sort of media topics you wish to cover. I know a lot of you have been wanting to talk Andor, and it is fair game as far as spoilers is concerned. I will have all the episodes watched by the time we get to the next episode of Friday Flight. We're 6 episodes into that show, so now we've got 6 left. So don't worry about that as far as feedback is concerned. But yeah, Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays are usually when you can find regular shows here on the Flightcast podcast network, if you will. And then every once in a while, like this particular episode, we'll have an episode of Flight Review to review a new movie that has come out. Before this, I did a review on Sinners. And before that, I also have been doing episodes of Flight Review specifically for members of patreon.com/theflightcast. Those are episodes of the show, reviewing movies that you more than likely have watched that I have not watched yet, and I'm now crossing off of my list. Most recently, since I started doing this on Patreon, let's see, I've watched the theatrical Hellraiser films, I've watched Soul from Pixar, I have watched Uncle Buck for the first time, I watched Purple Rain for the first time on the anniversary of Prince's death, and I've got some other ones playing here. I think I might go back to the Pixar well pretty soon here as far as crossing a couple more movies off of my list of movies to watch. But those episodes of Flight Review, along with other special bonus episodes of Flight Box, and also Flight Report, whenever I get to read comics, those are available as bonus content at patreon.com/theflightcast. Thank you so much to those of you who are subscribers to that. Cannot thank you enough for your support. And for anybody who is interested in getting full access to the bonus content there, you can go to patreon.com/theflightcast and sign up to be a flight officer, and you will get access to all of the bonus content that is there and all the new bonus content that will be posted going forward. Mostly reviews of movies, TV, and other assorted media that you may or may not have watched. Maybe some new things here and there. I try to keep new things here topside, but other stuff that I cross off the list, definitely there for consumption, if you will, and discussion on patreon.com/theflightcast. But that's why this is episode 52 of Flight Review, because a bunch of them have been posted on Patreon. And part of the reason we got to such a high number now, 52, is because I also tried doing 12 days of Flight Review. I did a bunch of Christmas movies. I reviewed a bunch of Christmas movies, some that I had seen, a number that I hadn't seen necessarily in a while, to be honest with you. For the first time, I think, if I remember correctly, or maybe they were all ones that I've seen before and I was re-adjudicating them. Yes, that's what it was. Pardon me. There's also going to be some new Christmas movies that I want to do for another 12 days of Flight Review in the upcoming Christmas season, but we're a ways away from that. It's only May. Why am I fast forwarding all the way to December? No, definitely not. But that's why those episodes are there, plus a ton of other content. So thank you so much for those of you that hopefully are enjoying it. And anybody interested, again, go to patreon.com/theflightcast for all of that bonus content. All right, people, let's get into it. Thunderbolts. I can't say that I was the most hyped to see this film. This is not my most anticipated comic book film of the year. That is probably still Superman, which is out in July 11th, of course, because, I prioritize DC at heart. I am a fan of both Marvel and DC, but my preference is DC Comics in that regard. That being said, I am a fan of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. I own 34 MCU films, like the first 34 films in glorious steelbook form. I've already got Captain America Brave New World pre-ordered, and rest assured I will have Thunderbolts pre-ordered for sure, because you can't own part of a set, right? Regardless of how I have movies ranked and whatnot. And I have my full rankings, right? I went recently and I re-adjudicated, and that's another episode that you can find on Patreon. I spent an hour explaining how I rebalanced and re-adjudicated my list and my rankings for the MCU, and I've broken it into 3 tiers. I got a high tier, I got a mid tier, and I got a low tier. And now that we're at 36 movies, they're in even 12 movies apiece, which is cool. It's going to stay that way until we get to Fantastic Four First Steps on July 25th. But right now, it's an even keel, like even thirds, if you will. And I had to figure out exactly where I was going to put this particular movie, because now that we are 2/3 of the way through Marvel's 2025 theatrical schedule, I said, well, let's see how this one goes. I went into Brave New World with, potential expectations, but didn't necessarily have them high. I was like, well, it could go this way, it could go that way. And that one's still 20th on my list. I believe it's still 20th. Yeah, that one, or no, hang on. Did that change? Actually, I take that back. The ranking of Brave New World actually did change. And this is kind of a hint with respect to where I'm going to rank Thunderbolts, which I will reveal that at the end of this episode. But Captain America Brave New World is now 21. It was 20, but it's now 21 on the list. So that means Thunderbolts moved it down. The question is, how much higher than Brave New World did I put Thunderbolts? And like I said, coming into seeing the film, I wasn't, like incredibly enthused. It was one of those where it's like, okay, I'm going to see it because it's a Marvel movie and I see Marvel movies, right? That's what I do. I don't just skip Marvel Cinematic Universe films. I have enjoyed this franchise immensely since 2008. I am a fan of it. There are a number of great films in it. There's a number of mid-range films that I think are decently good, pretty good. And then there are a number of films that I think aren't so great, but still I can find enjoyment out of them, even some of the ones that I really don't like Thor Love and Thunder or Guardians Volume 2. I don't necessarily talk about those a whole lot because I don't like talking about things that I don't like so much. But I have reviewed all of them, and I do watch all of them. I will say that going into the movie on Friday, it was a little auspicious. Like, it wasn't like the best start, because the thing was, like, the show times are off. I didn't get to go to my regular theater. I go to the Imagine Theater chain up here in Michigan, and the normal one of those that I go to, they didn't have a showtime earlier than 2 o'clock. Well, I got out of work at like noon, and yeah, I mean, I could have killed 2 hours, but I wanted a sooner showtime, like 12:30. I mean, I'm hustling a little bit, but like 1 o'clock. 1 o'clock is like the best time for me, like after I get out of work, for me to go see a film and, not be there all day because I have a long drive home after that. So I ended up having to go to one of the other Imagine theaters. I actually went to the IMAX that they had out in Novi, and that is, for people who don't know, I brought this up a couple years ago. People were asking, what the hell is an IMAX? And well, IMAX is Imagine's own proprietary format, which is essentially IMAX size with recliner seats, right? Because you go to a lot of IMAX theaters, even the digital IMAX, they're not all recliner seats. In fact, I think most of them are not recliner seats, if I'm not mistaken. But this one is, and they're very comfortable. Imagine, pound for pound, for me, is the best theater chain that we have in this area. I love the recliners. I love the space. I love the sound and the picture. And I'd been to this theater before. I think the last time I went to this particular Imagine theater might have been Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, Mutant Mayhem. I think it might have been that. But either way, I've been to this theater before, and so they had a 1 o'clock showing. And I went there, and it was already a little off because first, I went a row too high and thought that my seat didn't exist. But what I didn't know was that there is a row for disabled individuals that is at the very top. And I should have clocked that because there was actually somebody there. I think it was a son and his father, and I think the father was disabled, and he was sitting in a special seat. And I didn't. It took me like 5 to 10 minutes. I'm like, wait a minute, am I in the right theater? Is this the right seat? And it was like, oh, okay. And so I finally get that figured out. And then I sit down and the previews begin and it's blurry. And I'm like, is this a 3D movie? I don't, typically, full disclosure, I don't do 3D movies anymore. Not just because of the glasses, but just I prefer seeing the 2D experience in general, because 3D as a novelty is kind of whatever for me. I would just prefer to watch the movie, in its own 2D glory as, intended cinematically, if you will. I'm not big on the 3D anymore. So it's like, okay, well, I'm stuck because this movie wasn't advertised as 3D when I bought the tickets through Fandango. So now I got to go back down and get a pair of glasses and sit down. All right, okay, let's see. Let's see how this goes. Well, the problem, of course, same problem that popped up. I don't know if anybody remembers. Last year, I reviewed Godzilla X Kong because I didn't really want to see that, but Shonda did. I'm not really that big on the last two Godzilla movies as part of the MonsterVerse. But that was when I did the dual review of Godzilla X Kong and Monkey Man. Monkey Man was really good. But either way, I don't know if anybody remembers that review last year, but when we went to go see Godzilla X Kong, the 3D was screwed up for like the first 10 minutes. Like they hadn't switched over, right? So it was blurry. The same thing happened here. And it wasn't the same theater. That was the Imagine over in Royal Oak. This is a different one in Novi, but it was the same problem. It's like they didn't switch it over once the movie started. And so I thought about getting up and doing the same thing I did for Godzilla X Kong, but I didn't want to miss any of what was going on in the film, so I waited to see if anybody else did, and sure enough, there was a guy, like several rows down, who did get up, and he clearly did go talk to somebody because about 2 or 3 minutes later, after he came back and sat down, you saw like the slider or whatever, the lens or whatever it is that they got to put in place over the projector. You saw it slide into place. It was almost like it was a scene shifting, but I know it wasn't a scene shift. It wasn't an edit or a cut in the film. And all of a sudden, oh, okay, it's clear, it's good. Thankfully, it didn't take that long. It wasn't that far into the film. We were still in the Yelena portion at the early beginning of the film as it is the intro, if you will, right? We hadn't gotten so far into it with blurriness. So at least they corrected it as quickly as they could. But still, it's just like, come on, guys, have somebody at the ready. I know it's at 1 o'clock on a Friday, like a weekday, and I know that there's not a ton of people here, which again is why I was there, because I didn't want to go into a full theater. I try to avoid that these days more often than not. Sometimes it works out like it did with Sinners, right? But either way, it's like, yeah, I'm not big on like big crowds and whatnot. Not my first viewing of Sinners, mind you. My second viewing, when I saw it a second time with Shonda about a week or so ago. But either way, they got that fixed. So, all right, cool. We're settled. We're sat down. I got a popcorn tin. I did because I got a Thunderbolts popcorn tin. I said, I got one for Brave New World. May as well get one for Thunderbolts. This time I actually got popcorn in. I didn't just buy it separately. And I had a Coke. I had a cherry vanilla Coke, and I was okay with that. I normally don't do that on a first run, like first time seeing a film, because I don't want to risk going to the bathroom. But I was all right. I was all right. I made it through, and it was perfectly okay with respect to that. Yeah, I had to go to the bathroom after it was over, but Thunderbolts isn't that long of a movie. It's a little over 2 hours. And quite honestly, the content of the movie itself was definitely enough to keep my attention and keep me like captivated and wrapped up in the film to where, that definitely became a very secondary concern as far as like having to go to the bathroom and whatnot. And you know what? I said earlier that I needed probably another day or so to process it. I did Friday Flight on Friday, and I was like, part of me wonders if I should just do Flight review now instead of like holding off on it later. But I needed a little bit longer to process that particular movie. Because my high level thoughts to start off with respect to Thunderbolts is it was not what I expected whatsoever. I went into that movie with a completely different mindset and idea of what I was going to see, and I was taken aback. I really was. And I'd even gotten some whispers and some hints, and by the way, spoilers, here we go. Spoiler warning, right, for people. I said it was spoiler filled earlier. I got to talk spoilers with this particular one, especially this particular film. So for those of you, I know Anthony, you said you weren't going to see it until Tuesday. I understand that. Cool. As soon as you see it, then listen to this review. Hopefully, you probably have already seen it by the time you're listening to it now. But either way, I got to talk spoilers on this one. I'd gotten an inkling. I'd heard some words about how this film deals with mental health, and I said, "Oh, okay. Well, that's very intriguing." And even a coworker of mine, at my job, he'd even told me the same. He said, because he had gotten to see an early screening of it, and he said, it deals with mental health and it deals with this. It's going to be very interesting to see how people discuss this film and how it is received. And I got to tell you, as far as all that subject matter is concerned, I mean, number one, I enjoyed the film. The film was very good, much better than I really gave any expectations for it. But I'll tell you, something happened in this particular film that try as I might, and I'm going to bring up my list again here, and I'm going to look through all of these films that I've seen. Yeah, I'm looking through my entire list of MCU films, like all 36 of them to date. And I don't think that what happened to me in Thunderbolts happened in any other of these viewings. And not that Marvel movies are not emotional, they most certainly are. But Thunderbolts, I cried. I did. I cried. And it wasn't a like an ugly cry or a loud cry or anything like that. It was just there are parts of this movie that if you were somebody that has ever like had mental health struggles, or if you're somebody that deals with depression, if you're somebody that deals with any of the issues that they actually do dive into in this film, or if you have any type of empathy whatsoever for people that go through those issues at all, or there's any type of relatability for you whatsoever with respect to any mental health, there's likely going to be a part of this movie that hits you. And there are different parts, and I've been seeing some of the discourse on social media and threads, especially, where people have talked about parts of the film that hit them, right? Whether it's one of the shame rooms that people go into or in this film, or whether it's the scene between Yelena and her father, Alexei, and how he still sees the good in her. Like, there are different parts of this film that when they hit you, they'll hit you. And I was overwhelmed. I was not expecting, like, even knowing like all the mental health stuff. I said, okay, you know what? I see where they're going with certain parts. It's like, okay, you know what? But I don't think this is going to be. I even said that to myself in my head. I was like, I don't think that this is going to be anything that gets me emotional, because I'm not against being emotional in movies at all. I maybe when I was a kid. Maybe when I was younger and I was still into that toxic masculinity bullshit, I felt that way. Not anymore. I'm in my 40s. I don't give a shit. If movies are meant to stoke emotions, they're meant to get you going. So if a movie like brings that kind of emotion out of you and you get teary eyed, or if you flat on start crying, embrace it. Seriously, like that is part of that means the message resonates with you in some form, that the movie is doing its job, right? The story is being effective in terms of how it has been told, hopefully in that regard. And so I have nothing against that whatsoever. And that there was a point at the end of the movie that just really hit me. Really, really hit me. And I'll get into what that was when I talk about the writing of this film. But this movie was far more emotionally complex than I even thought it was going to be, truthfully. And, I'd said before, like the comp that I have for my expectations, my baseline expectations for what type of this movie could be was Suicide Squad, right? Either Suicide Squad or the Suicide Squad, it doesn't matter which one. Just the concept seemed very familiar to me. And it's definitely different, but it's also similar in that regard, right? There are certain things that happen in the film, the way that the team is assembled, if you will, not necessarily as some type of nefarious plot, but definitely part of a nefarious plot, right? In fact, I almost feel like the assembly of Thunderbolts in this film is more organic than what we see in the other, in Suicide Squad or the Suicide Squad. And I say more organic just because, again, I'll talk a little bit about the writing later, because I do really actually like the machinations behind that. But yeah, I was not expecting the mental health focus to be that strong whatsoever. I wasn't expecting it to be that powerful. And I've seen people, I've seen a lot of defensive behavior from Marvel Cinematic Universe fans over the last couple of days. And it's interesting because there's always that part of me. There's going to be that part of me. You guys know this, right? Anthony, Phil, John, Wally, any of you guys, yeah, Jared, you guys know, like our longtime listeners here, Stu Little, of course, you know that coming from being a DCEU fan, that what we've dealt with as part of that fandom for the past 9 years, we have dealt with a lot of shit. And we have been on the defensive, and we have had our shields up to defend any of those movies that we thoroughly enjoyed, especially ones directed by Zack Snyder, if you will, against bloggers, against critics, and against MCU fanboys that wanted to keep throwing the fact that the MCU was the gold standard in our faces. So it's intriguing, having had dealt with that for so long. It's intriguing that over the last couple of years we really have seen that humbling that a lot of us were looking for from the MCU fandom, and now they're full on defensive, right? Because you're hearing people say things like, "Well, Thunderbolts is the best film since Endgame," right? Just like how they told us that Wonder Woman was the best film since Dark Knight. or Shazam, the first Shazam that is, or Aquaman, were the best films since The Dark Knight, right? We've heard that a lot about how, they got to go all the way back to the Nolan movie that they really loved, right, to tell us, oh, that's the last time DC made anything great, right? So they've constantly told us that, and now you're seeing Marvel fans get defensive when they say this, like, wait a minute, the MCU or like the MCU is back, and they're like, wait a minute, the MCU hasn't left, the MCU has been here, I've enjoyed Phase 4 and 5, and I get all these people that enjoy Phase 4 and 5 that are coming to defend the Marvel Cinematic Universe because they feel that it needs defending, because they feel like it's taken it on the chin from the public. And again, we warned Marvel fans that the tables were going to turn on this, and that they were going to find themselves in that position because they weren't going to be the quote unquote gold standard forever. And sure enough, they're not. But I will say this. There are Marvel fans out there that are, they're talking about how the MCU never left. I agree with that. The MCU has never left. And there are a number of films in Phase 4 and 5 that I thoroughly enjoy. At least one or two of them I still have ranked ahead of Thunderbolts. Well, I'll get to which ones they are later on towards the end of the episode here. But I do want to say that for people that are, I've seen some posts saying Marvel has tackled mental health issues before. They brought up depression, and they bring up Iron Man 3 and the PTSD that Tony was dealing with. They brought up Thor and the stuff that his whole arc from the end of Infinity War through Endgame and into Thor: Love and Thunder, right? They brought up examples. They brought up plenty of examples from the MCU to this point where mental health has been focused on. But not like this, guys. I'm sorry. I can't agree with you. Thunderbolts is something above and beyond what we have seen with respect to how this franchise has treated mental health. And look, I'm not saying that the MCU has never dealt with it. Obviously, I just said all the examples that you bring up are definitely there. But this entire movie is centered around mental health. And literally the climax of this film is a mental health solution, right? Not a shoot 'em up solution, not a giant CGI fest solution, right? Like, we didn't get portals. We didn't get, the Iron Legion, right? We didn't get like a massive set piece where it's like, okay, here's where we take down the villain. No, it was literally, and this is going to sound corny, but it's the truth. It was literally the power of friendship. The power of friendship literally was how the enemy of this film was essentially defeated, if you will, okay? And the thing is, I knew it was coming, and I knew it was going to happen, and that's where I really started to get teary-eyed and really started to get emotional, because I'm like, when it just became clear that was what was going to happen, that was where it started to hit me. And again, I'll talk about this a little bit more in the writing, but no, this is unlike anything that the Marvel Cinematic Universe has done with respect to tackling mental health. It is, guys. I mean, look, you can talk about how they dealt with it in Iron Man 3. You can talk about how they dealt with it in the Guardians films. You can talk about how they dealt with it with Thor. Okay, cool. I guess we can have that discussion. But pound for pound for me, this is the most in-depth, relatably personal story that the Marvel Cinematic Universe has told with respect to mental health. And it didn't just approach it from one angle. It didn't even just approach it from one character. It approached it from multiple angles and from multiple characters. And that, to me, elevates this film above a great deal of the franchise. Because when you start telling stories like this, when you use superheroes and the comic book shared cinematic universe genre to tell a story about mental health like this, to make it this relatable to anybody out there that has dealt with these similar mental health challenges in their life, that transcends. That goes higher, right? And this is where, when I hear the phrase best MCU film since Endgame, that's when I have to go, well, Endgame isn't that great. And I don't think Endgame is that great. Endgame is just a slot above Brave New World for me, right? It was 19th, now it's 20th on the list. Yeah, Thunderbolts knocked it down too. I don't have Thunderbolts anywhere close to Endgame. Endgame is significantly lower, because as much as I enjoy Endgame as a film, it doesn't hit on this type of a level. It's not this type of a film. It's not written this way. It's not shot this way. It's not composed this way. This was a very daring story. This is a very personal story. This is a very relatable story. And the chemistry that we have, that we see between this cast and everybody involved, just everything that goes into this is more than just your typical 2 hours of CGI fest superhero fun and, hey, we enjoyed ourselves as a family for however long. No, you can have conversations. You can have some real in-depth, uncomfortable conversations after watching this film. And there aren't very many MCU films that we can say that about. This one, with respect to mental health as a subject, is absolutely one where after watching it, you can talk about how, hey, this is what depression feels like. This is what mental health issues feel like. This is what feeling alone feels like. Right there is so much subtext, and there's so much in there with respect to that relatability, and so that to me is what really transcends this film and makes it a very good to great film in this franchise. I saw Dave the Film Junkie the other day. He was posting on his Patreon. He said there was something missing that kept it from being a great film. And you know what? It really is going to come down to this. This is arguably one of the most subjective appraisals that you can have of a film, because it's really going to come down to how you personally process your relatability to mental health issues, right? And I saw somebody else on Threads, Otis Frampton, whom I'd never heard of, but he says is a writer slash artist of Oddly Normal and The Patchwork Girl of Oz, which I guess are both Image comics. But he's also written DC books, Star Wars comics, and an artist on He's got a link tree. But he posted something on the day of. He said, a reviewer apparently said, quote, "Marvel shouldn't expect me to relate to a movie about depression because I can't," end quote. And Otis said, "To the reviewer who said this about Thunderbolts, I'm genuinely happy for you. I am. I wish I didn't relate to a movie about depression as much as I did, but I don't have that luxury." And he had the shrug emoji. Well, okay. I would say that with respect to Otis, I'm glad that he's genuinely happy for that reviewer who said that Marvel shouldn't expect them to relate to a movie about depression because they can't. To me, I think that reviewer is in denial, loudly in denial. If you have to tell people, like in a review or publicly, that I can't relate to depression, you're arguably more depressed than the rest of us. That's deflection, is what that is. Because I'm sorry, in the world that we live in, you're never going to convince me that any of us are perfect with respect to mental health, especially if you live in the United States of America. There's no way that your mental health is peachy keen 100%. I don't care who you believe in or what your faith is or what type of life you've lived. You've struggled with something more than likely in this country. And if you haven't, then boy, that is a level of entitlement that probably gives you even more issues that you're, like hiding with respect to that. Because the one percenters are some of the most maladjusted individuals on this earth, but I digress. My point is this idea that Marvel shouldn't expect you to relate to a movie about depression because you can't. Well, I know a good deal of this audience, a good deal of the general audience, a good deal of Marvel fans that will 1000% relate to it. I related to it. There was stuff in this movie, like I said, hit me, and I've seen it. People talk about how it hit them, right? And this transcended more than just a simple superhero film, a simple team up film with a bunch of characters that we'd been introduced to in previous works, right? This went bigger. This went above and beyond. This was far more emotional than I thought it was going to be. This was far more relatable than I thought it was going to be. And quite honestly, I'm still kind of not dumbfounded, but just a little surprised. Truthfully, it was not what I was expecting in the best possible way, right? This is one of those cases where your expectations aren't necessarily low, but they're not really that high. And then you get a piece of work, you receive something, you watch something that's like, wow, this is one of the strongest entries in the franchise. It just is, with respect to what it does. It's not a perfect film. There really isn't a such thing as a perfect Marvel film in that regard, right? Closest they've gotten is Winter Soldier. Captain America, the Winter Soldier. But yes, that's still number one. I can allay your thoughts about that if you're trying to guess where I put Thunderbolts. No, it's not number one. Winter Soldier is still number one. There are a couple of movies still in between Winter Soldier and Thunderbolts. How many? I'll get to that. But Thunderbolts, high tier. I can at least tell you that right now. High tier Marvel Cinematic Universe film as far as I'm concerned. And it definitely starts with that cast, right? And this is the time where like everybody's been giving Florence Pugh her flowers, and I haven't seen. There's still a decent amount of Florence Pugh's work that I have not watched yet, but obviously I've seen Black Widow. I still need to watch that last episode of Hawkeye, but I've seen like clips of it now, right? So I mean, there's that, and just also seeing her, for the time that she was in Oppenheimer. Like I know she's a good actress. And quite honestly, here, putting her in somewhat of the lead role, like it works really well here. But it's a case where you need the chemistry of a group like this to really be organic and to really work, right? And this is a case where, because it's characters that those of us that have been longtime fans of the MCU and have watched damn near every movie and show, this is where we are rewarded for the homework that we have done, if you will, right? Because we know all of these characters. We've seen them elsewhere. And maybe there was one that we wanted to see more than others. And obviously, Yelena Belova is the one that I feel like a lot of fans probably wanted to see the most, right? She was the one that stole the show in Black Widow. And I've also seen some people, either rewatch Black Widow or give Black Widow some more flowers as a result of this film. And I didn't need to do that because I've always enjoyed Black Widow. I mean, granted, I have it like in the mid tier, but that's only because I've considered it a budget version. That's the nicer way of me putting it. That's the more PC way of me putting it. There was a phrase that I used to use that I'm not going to use anymore. But Black Widow is the budget version of Captain America the Winter Soldier. And I say that not in terms of like actual money spent, but just in terms of the story and the structure. There's a lot of similarities in terms of what they did with Black Widow that I feel were nerfed from Winter Soldier, which is not a bad thing, because if you're going to go ahead and take the structure and storyline from one of your movies, why not take it from the best one that you've made for someone that was also in that film, right? But that's where Yelena became like a fan favorite character that a lot of people wanted to see. And sure enough, yeah, she was the one that I think everybody was, that so many fans, not everybody, but a lot of fans were really looking to see and return to and get more in-depth work from Florence Pugh in this film. And she's aces. She's fantastic. She knows this role very well already, over the last couple of years that she's played it. She hasn't played it in a ton of things, but this is her chance. This is her time to shine and her time to really put herself out there as, front and center as what this character is going to be. A lot of people drawing the Black Widow comparisons, basically saying that she really showed her Natasha, if you will, in this particular role. And it's fantastic. And that chemistry only goes so far as how well as she works with everybody else. So how does she work with everybody else? Well, you don't have to worry about Sebastian Stan as Bucky Barnes. Now, he's the veteran of this entire group, which is crazy to think about it. This dude's been in the MCU since Phase 1. He's been playing this character since Phase 1. And man, has his arc gone through a lot. He has been to hell and back a couple of times with respect to the Bucky Barnes character. And does he know how to play this character well at this point in time? Most certainly he does, right? This is through all the Captain America films. This is through a Falcon and Winter Soldier show, right? This is through the Avengers, Infinity War and Endgame films, right? And now into this, right? And briefly, of course, not very much, but briefly in Brave New World. There were some people that said they wanted to see more of him in Brave New World. We got to see plenty of him here. And, it's a very nice natural progression for his character with respect to how Sebastian Stan plays him, and the way that he does it, the way that he, introduces himself here, and the way that he fits into this plot, and the way that he understands what this group has been through. And, because he was the first one, right? Like, all these people are malcontents. These are like, the people that necessarily didn't have had the power thrust upon them, and were manipulated, went to a dark place, and they're now trying to climb back up to the light because they actually have good in them in that regard, right? Like, that's what all these characters have. And he was like the first big one to do that and have the big redemptive arc in the MCU. So he's the elder statesman, and he plays it off really well in this particular film. And that leads into the other newbies, not so newbies, if you will. Wyatt Russell as John Walker / U.S. agent, for all of the hatred necessarily, or the dislike. I guess it was not full on hatred, but the dislike that we had for his character in the Falcon and the Winter Soldier, right? You see where the redeeming values in the midst of his assholishness are in this particular film. And Wyatt Russell, following in his father's footsteps, does a really good job with that. And he's definitely more of a douche, if you will, more of a rough around the edges in that regard with respect to the character that he plays. Not comparing it to the character that Kurt Russell played in Guardians Volume 2, but just saying, like, as an actor. And the other thing Wyatt Russell's been in that I haven't seen yet is Monarch. That's still on my list. I have to get to Apple TV Plus with respect to, all of my list of catch up just on that network, on that app alone. But yeah, he was solid. He was You bought the energy and you bought the need for him to be accepted, the need for him to feel like he was the smartest guy in the room, and then, getting humbled, if you will, when necessary, right? He was the the lovable jerk, right? Like, you've got a friend like that, somebody that's like, okay, I know he's an asshole and I know he says some snarky shit here and there, but he means well, right? It's one of those that he's always walking a road to hell paved with good intentions. He doesn't mean to be that much of an asshole, but he's got a good heart, right? He has some heart, right? He's not just a cold, heartless bastard in that regard, right? Like we may have thought he was back when he was U.S. agent, back in the early days in the Falcon and the Winter Soldier. So there was that. So he was great, solid with him. The one that I was looking forward to, quite honestly, that I am a fan of, I was looking forward to Ghost, because I am a fan of Hannah John Kamen. Going back to, let's see, what was the first? I looked this up the other day. What was the first thing that I ever saw her in? Well, she was in Ready Player One. She's technically a First Order officer in The Force Awakens. She was in the Tomb Raider reboot with Alicia Vikander, and she was also in the one season of Brave New World, which was the Peacock series starring Alden Ehrenreich and her, and the dude that played Viserys Targaryen in the first season of Game of Thrones. And it was an adaptation of Aldous Huxley's Brave New World, the novel, the science fiction novel that I read many years ago. And she was really good in that show. I want to watch. She's also she was in 15 Million Merits and Playtest, two different episodes of Black Mirror. There's a show that she was in, that she was a regular in, called Killjoys, that I haven't watched yet, that I totally want to watch. It is on my list to actually watch it. Definitely will. But yeah, and she was also in a couple of episodes of Game of Thrones as well. I mean, what hasn't she been in? But I really like her. Like, I'm really a fan of, like, her work. And when she popped up as Ghost in Ant-Man and the Wasp, I was like, okay, I would love to see more of this character, where this character goes. And so I liked her. I really liked her in this particular movie. No, Stu was saying in Friday Flight that she just seemed to be, have the snarky Brit, be the snarky Brit with the lines here and there. And yeah, no, she's definitely that type of character in this film, but she's also like that in other things as well. She's just really good at playing that. So I don't have an issue with how they played her here. And again, there was enough chemistry, I feel, between this cast that it felt organic. It felt genuine, right? Nothing about it felt forced in that regard. Not even with, arguably my least favorite of the cast, which was David Harbour as Red Guardian. And it is nothing against David Harbour. And it's also nothing against how he's playing the character. I know this is how he plays Red Guardian. This is how he was in Black Widow. This is how he's just plays this character. This is how he's going to be in the MCU, regardless of how he was in the comics. I don't know what the whole history behind him was, or what his real connections to Natasha and Yelena are. But this is the MCU version of the Red Guardian character, and it's just, it's the comic relief, right? And I'm not saying it wasn't funny, because there were definitely parts of it that were funny, but you know how I am about humor in the MCU. Like, I don't always think it's quite as organic, and I do think a lot of times it devolves more into one-linery stuff than it should in the MCU. He's the one-liner guy. He's the one-liner character. And again, that's fine, because that's what this franchise does. That's how this franchise orchestrates things with a lot of its characters. I'm okay with that. If you leave it to one character that's really doing that on the regular, I'm okay. And he had his moments too, right? It wasn't all one-liners. Like I mentioned earlier, the scene that he had between him and Yelena, where she was getting very emotional about all the bad things that she had done, and he said, "You see all the bad in you, I see all the good in you." Like, that was touching. That was very touching. And again, his heart's in it, right? His heart's in the right place. He's goofy, and he doesn't say the right thing all the damn time, but he's still, like with the rest of this group, his heart is in the right place. And that's the biggest thing that I can say about how all these characters are being played, is their hearts are all in the right place. And that's where a lot of the organic nature of this group can come into play. And certainly when it comes to, arguably the MVP of this film, which is Lewis Pullman as Bob/Sentry/The Void. I mean, right there, that's the heart and soul the heart and soul of this film by far. And it's crazy because the idea, and this is, again, this is a testament to how this film was written, how this film was put together, but the idea that the heart and soul of your film is also going to at one point become the greatest, the biggest villain, the big bad. How is this dude the hero and the big bad at the same time in this film? Again, the way that it's composed, the way that it's structured, really strong with respect to that. And Lewis Pullman does a fantastic job of playing a character that you never really hate. You're looking at him like, okay, this dude is like innocent initially. Like he has no idea what's going on with him. And then you find out, what he's dealt with in his own personal life, what would have led him to, go to Ox and get tested on. And then, you see the progression like mentally in terms of what he's dealing with and what's going on in his own mind. And he's arguably the most relatable character in the film. Again, depending on your relationship with depression and like how you relate to that subject matter with respect to mental health. But he was aces. He was outstanding. He did a great job, as far as being the organic center of everything with respect to why the Thunderbolts are even assembled and what they're even doing, for the rest of this film. Like really, really strong, really, really well done. And yeah, again, all of this just seems very organic. Like nothing about it seemed forced. Everybody played their parts. Everybody vibed and gelled together extremely well. I really do not have any complaints about this cast. Again, even with Red Guardian, that's a humor thing. That's a subjective thing for me, with respect to that. I can't fault David Harbour for how he played the character. I also can't fault Julia Louis-Dreyfus for how she plays Valentina Allegra de Fontaine, because from the beginning, first time that we saw her, and all of her appearances, whether it's, a second of Wakanda Forever or a little bit in, at the end of Black Widow or, Falcon and Winter Soldier, wherever, right? Or not Falcon and Winter Soldier, but Hawkeye and stuff, right? The times that we see her, it's like, okay, well, you got Julia Louis-Dreyfus for this role for a reason. And, again, going with the Suicide Squad comparison, okay, she's clearly like the Waller, but she's not Waller. She's absolutely not Waller, and she's not supposed to be Waller. She is a Waller, structurally speaking, in terms of her, like, Lord, like being in charge and like bringing the team together. But she is not. She doesn't have quite the. I mean, she has she talks a good game, right? She doesn't necessarily have the internal confidence. That's not necessarily there. She's got some demons and some skeletons, and we saw a big one that she had in this film. But like, the idea is that she's still got a comedic twist to it. It's almost like, what she did with Veep. It's like basically playing the Veep character as a head of a clandestine organization in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, of a spy group, if you will. So, like, not Nick Fury, but like a funnier, like Veepy Nick Fury, right? Like that's the best way that I can describe it. There are times where she's serious, and then there are times where it's like, okay, you're not that serious in that regard, right? So yeah, it's a very different type of portrayal, but the way that they have set up this character so far, the way that they've had Julie Louis-Dreyfus play this character to this point, she didn't do anything in this film, as we dive further into her character finally, she didn't do anything in this film that betrayed anything that she teased to this point in any of her previous appearances. So I thought she was solid with what she did, and not nearly as goofy at times, definitely more conniving, definitely more underhanded. There are shades of Amanda Waller that she has. And again, I don't have history with the character as far as Marvel Comics is concerned. So like if I look at so according to this, she first appeared in Nick Fury Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. What was she? She's a member of a European jet set, citizen of Italy. Both of her parents were killed for aiding an unspecified resistance movement. She found her life meaningless, desiring to carry on in their places so their deaths would not be in vain. She was eventually contacted by S.H.I.E.L.D. and entered a training program to be an agent. Met Director Fury aboard the helicarrier toward the end of her training. Quickly became a leading member of S.H.I.E.L.D. along others because of her remarkable talents and skills. Reassigned to the position of S.H.I.E.L.D. liaison to the United Kingdom. Okay, so this is clearly like, and there's a whole lot more going on here, but like clearly the way that they're playing it for the MCU, there's hints of that there, there's parts of that type of ideal there in terms of how her character biography. But again, it's Julia Louis-Dreyfus. You're not casting Julia Louis-Dreyfus if you're not going to put some humor into the portrayal, right? Like, that's just something to understand with how this role is cast. And again, nothing that she did in this film betrayed anything that she did in any of her setup roles, whether, you know, in any of their other appearances. So in that regard, no issues with respect to how she played it. And like I said, there are definitely some more nefarious parts of her character, some darker parts of her character, but she was consistent. She was certainly consistent. That's the biggest thing I can say about everybody in this main cast, is they were very consistent. I mean, even, you know, getting down to Geraldine Viswanathan, who plays Mel, which I'd never seen her in anything. Like, where is she from? She's a newcomer. Uh, and you know what? She was like the Darcy. You know, like how Darcy was, you know, following around Natalie Portman's Jane Foster. Same thing. You know, she's an assistant, but obviously this is, you know, for a bigger stakes, you know, darker situations, if you will, with respect to what's going on with Ox and trying to cover things up and everything involved with the Thunderbolts themselves, right? But I haven't seen a single thing that this woman has been in. She's been in Emo the Musical, Bad Education, Hala. Oh, okay. So I haven't seen Hala, but I've seen the like the poster and the advertisements for. Oh, it's an Apple TV Plus film. Okay, all right. So that's where she's from. A number of other things, and now she's in the MCU. Okay, fair enough. So hey, I had no issues with her at all. One of the cast member that I do want to bring up here, and this is a big point of contention, not contention, but just something that I want everybody to remember. And most of the people that I'm talking about in this review that are listening to this show, you don't have an issue with this, but I'm going to bring it up anyway. Wendell Pierce. Wendell Pierce in this film plays Gary, who is a congressman that is leading the impeachment proceedings against Valentina. Okay. Now, for a second, I thought he was only going to be there for like 2 minutes, but he reoccurs. He pops up in a couple of other scenes, right? So he is a living, breathing, supporting cast character in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. And I bring this up because in a couple of months, he's Perry White in Superman. So, one more time, for all of the people who believe that these actors can only be in one franchise or the other and never the twain shall meet, bullshit. Wrong. Absolutely 1000% wrong. We have more than enough evidence, okay? I'm adding this to the already mounting evidence that I have with respect to Michael Keaton, who was Batman back in 89 and 92 and then reprised it in The Flash 2 years ago, right? He was the Vulture in Spider-Man Homecoming, which is, you know, still one of the MCU's top villains as far as I'm concerned. I can go back to Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania, right? Because still, I don't think it was that forgettable of a film, at least not for me. But Goliath was played by Lawrence Fishburne just a handful of years after he played Perry White in both Man of Steel and Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice, Ultimate Edition, of course, but he was in the theatrical and the Ultimate Edition. My point is that once again, proof that these actors don't care. They don't give a shit. It doesn't matter. Like, Marvel and DC is not a dividing line for them. They will play in either of these franchises. They will play in either of these sandboxes, even in the same year. And that is what we are getting here. In the same year, we got Wendell Pierce in a supporting role in this film, Thunderbolts. He's going to be Perry White. Now, you want to argue who's the bigger supporting role? Whatever. That's a shitty argument. Why are we even arguing about that? My point is that they'll do both. Just wanted to throw that out there because whenever that happens, I always have to highlight it. I will always highlight that. When I see an actor that's playing in both sandboxes, I will just use that as another reminder of, hey, Hollywood doesn't care. These actors do not give a shit. Superheroes is all one genre to them, and it should be all one genre to us. We can prefer one or the other, but tribalism is bullshit. And even the actors in Hollywood know this. So just wanted to throw that out there. When talking about the strength of the writing for Thunderbolts, the first thing that I do want to address is there was the one cast member that I didn't mention in the cast portion of this review, and that was Olga Kurylenko reprising her role as Antonia Dreykov, a.k.a. Taskmaster. And of course, those of you that have seen the movie know that that's because she's dead in the first 5 minutes. Shot in the head by Ava, right? And I've seen a few people that were, you know, a little disappointed with that decision. I saw one person say that, well, they wanted to have her, situation expounded upon. They wanted to see some more conversation and dive into her backstory a little bit more and that type of deal. And to me, I wasn't that bothered by it. I really wasn't bothered by it at all. I mean, it was one of those where I didn't see it coming. It was shocking, and shocking in the sense of like, oh, well, okay. Like I thought she was going to come back to life at some point, and that did not happen. The room incinerated. It's like, oh, her body's still in. No, she's dead. And that's it. There's not going to be Taskmaster, and that was clearly the plan. So that was there's a couple things with that. First, that was clearly like the Suicide Squad part of the story. The idea that, oh, there's an expendability to these people in that regard, right? And at least that's how Valentina was treating them, right? And it's a different type of expendability than what we see with the Suicide Squad, at least in this regard, because this isn't supposed to be a group. That the idea is that the Thunderbolts are not supposed to form anything together. They're not supposed to come together. They're supposed to be destroyed. They're supposed to be dead. Valentina tried to kill them, to erase all of the evidence that she had of her experiments and her whole Ox program before she got impeached. That's the whole point of this, is that she led them there to their death, trying to destroy all of them, like, across the board in that regard. And so the idea is that, all right, Taskmaster gets taken out early, so as you're starting to, learn and vibe and relate to all these other characters, you may have that sneaking thought in your head like, oh, wait, could any more of them get taken out? Because the story doesn't tell you, the movie doesn't let you know, yeah, we're not going in that direction. We're going in a completely different direction, but we're going to give you this red herring. And if you're going to use any of these characters as a red herring at the beginning, I'm glad it was that particular character. Because, quite frankly, out of everybody else, I feel like, personally, in my opinion, there was the least amount of developmental potential. And I'm not saying they couldn't have done anything. They most certainly could have. But to me, like from the moment that she was introduced in Black Widow, I always thought of her as that movie's Bucky, that movie's Winter Soldier. And the thing is, you can't have two Winter Soldiers in the same movie. So if you already got Bucky that's going to show up in this movie later on, then you can't have pseudo Bucky, and in my opinion, she was pseudo Bucky from Black Widow, also be there as well. And I was more interested in the stories and the chemistry from the other characters, right? I mean, no, I didn't want Red Guardian to be the one because that's Yelena's father, and she's already lost her sister. She doesn't need any more emotional turmoil, right? Like she's already having a struggle processing through the emotional turmoil that she has, and that much you knew from the beginning of the film, that much you knew going in, is that she's got some emotional issues. We just weren't certain until we got through the rest of the movie how the emotional and mental issues were going to be represented in the rest of the team in that regard, right? That's what we became privy to. That's what we learned and discovered in that regard, right? But yeah, the way Taskmaster was kind of thrown away in this film, it didn't bug me because, that there was definitely more of the ensemble there. I personally was more interested in the other characters that were part of the group. If somebody was curious about, they wanted to know more about this version of Taskmaster, I understand if that bugs them. I understand if that, that's a demerit on the film for them. It's all subjective. You can feel that way. I totally get that. It was not one for me. And I also feel like with a lot of the criticism that the Taskmaster character had from Black Widow, that may have played a part in Jake Schreier and the writer's decisions, to not have her featured as part of this group going forward. But either way, it just wanted to address that for a second. That really didn't bug me, to be honest with you. Now, getting into the rest of this film, and even with her death, even with Taskmaster's death, that does dive into the core, like, mental health struggles and also the gelling and the camaraderie, the chemistry of this group, right? Because obviously that's a point of contention for a bit with respect to Yelena and Ava, and it really does start to establish and really does kind of cement this idea that these characters are not all that good, right? Like, they may have good intentions, but they've all been walking a road to hell for a while. And the thing is, you can't call them villains necessarily. They're antagonists. Like, nobody here, I mean, the idea is that they're called villains, but they've all been antagonists at worst in that regard, right? Whether it's Black Widow, and what Yelena did in that film, or whether it's what U.S. Agent did, even though he did kill someone. But this is also where the homework problem comes into play. The U.S. Agent openly killed someone in Falcon and Winter Soldier, but it's like you know, there is, they have to reconcile this, and they have to live with the consequences of their decisions from way back when. And I do agree. Like, there was one person when we get to the sequence where the shame rooms, if you will, and we get to see, because that's part of like Bob slash Sentry slash Void's power. We'll just call him Bob going forward, right? Part of his power is that he'll come into contact with you, and your shame room will be exposed in terms of where you're at. And for Yelena, it was definitely a very dark and powerful one, where she basically lured a friend of hers into a death trap, a young friend of hers into a death trap, and this girl is killed, murdered, shot in the head. Right? We don't see it on screen, but it's definitely the implied violence off screen, which I think is also a new thing for the MCU. To be honest with you, for them to go in a direction like that. I mean, probably the closest we've come to that is the Red Room stuff from Black Widow, and we do see a little bit more of that in this film as well later on, when we see another shame room for Elena, where she is, she assembles the gun faster than the others, and the others get their hands whipped in punishment while she watches in that regard, right? So there's that part of it, but like, we saw a shame room for her, we saw a shame room for John Walker, with respect to how his family treats him, and he hides the fact that his wife left him, took the kids and all that, right? We see the shame room. The big one that we saw was the one for Valentina, where she saw her father get killed, where she saw her father get roughed up and killed by men that he owed money to, right? And that, informs her perspective, on life, and how she feels about power, right? And how the acquisition and the control of power is, the most important thing for her. But someone did say that they would have liked to have seen the shame room for Ava Ghost, and yeah, I agree. I would have liked to have seen that as well, but I think I can kind of understand why she didn't have one, partially because with respect to the ones that did get shame rooms, like those were cases where, we didn't get, to me, I feel like we didn't get as much of their backstory necessarily delved into, because of how much room that they were sharing in the movies that they were in, right? Like Black Widow, obviously Yelena's sharing the spotlight with Natasha, and she came in for the last little bit of Hawkeye, right? Not like a huge, like a massive part of the whole series in that regard, right? And U.S. Agent, I mean, that Falcon and Winter Soldier's got to be about Bucky and Sam first and foremost, and then the whole thing with Carly Morgenthau and whatnot. So he gets a backseat. He takes a backseat with respect to them. But in Ava's case, she was the primary antagonist in Ant-Man and the Wasp, right? And for however forgettable people may find that movie, it was still a case where, okay, if you're not focusing on Ava and what happened with her, then you're focusing on, Scott Lang and Hope Van Dyne, and Hank in that regard. So it's like there was more room, I felt like, for more of her story to get played out, and for more things to happen. So like I can understand why she wasn't necessarily, didn't get a shame room in this one, because they didn't necessarily want to overstuff the film. I mean, they could have made it longer, they could have, but I feel like pacing wise they were trying to keep it, to a tight, as close to 2 hours as possible, without going too far over. It didn't need to be a 2.5 hour long film in that regard. It could have been. It very well could have been, but they wanted to make it a little, a little shorter in that regard, a little bit more, I guess, palatable for runtime. Because there are plenty of people, including my coworker earlier that I said saw the movie earlier, is someone that does not like long movies. Like 2.5 hours is kind of the breaking point for them. 3 hours or more, no, they don't do that. And I'm like, and this is not somebody that takes film late. This is somebody that has seen a lot of films. But yeah, that is just that is a point of like a deal breaker for him, if you will. He does not do films that are too long, so I don't dare even remotely suggest that he watch Zack Snyder's Justice League. The length of the film means that he won't. Even the only hope is if I tell him it's broken up into 7 parts, and then he'll watch it episodically in that regard. But either way, back to Thunderbolts. I really have to applaud Jake Schreier and, let's see, the other writers, Eric Pearson and Joanna Callow. I really have to applaud them for telling a very personal story with respect to this, because that's what this is. This is a personal story about mental health and dealing with depression, amidst the backdrop of superheroes, right? And this is something that, in one film, a lot of movies, most movies in the MCU don't touch on it like this. They don't dive into it head first like this. And again, I know plenty of MCU fans are like, well, Iron Man 3, Thor, da da da. Yes, I get that. But this is different, guys. This really is, as far as I'm concerned. And you can agree or disagree with me on that if you like. But the entire point of this film was dealing with that. It was literally the power of not being alone and the power of dealing with your own issues. Because everybody in this film had their own issues. Everybody in this film had their own demons. Everybody in this film had their own moments where they had to, face that, with respect to whether they were going to be alone or whether they were actually going to come together, right? There's that moment where, Sentry, Bob, he basically, it is manipulated by Valentina and she turns him into this shining, basically Homelander, right? Like her whole idea basically is she's gonna like he's Homelander for her and he's gonna be her golden ticket out of being impeached and staying in power, right? And he has got way too many issues and he is just not feeling that at all. And this is when the void really starts to creep up in him and really starts to take over and he really becomes dark about it, right? And that's where I love how like him being triggered, killed with the failsafe is basically what brings the void out, brings that darkness out, because he doesn't feel like he can trust anybody. He feels like he is totally alone. He allows the darkness to consume himself. He allows the darkness to consume everyone and everything else. And that was a bait and switch as well, right? Because there's that one sequence where things are crumbling down. There's all the debris and whatnot, and Red Guardian saves that one girl, and then the void touches her, and she just immediately blips out of existence. Like, oh, is she dead? And then you find out, no, she's not dead. She is trapped in this void of depression that he is engulfing the entirety of the city with, right? And naturally, like Elena discovers this and basically decides to run in there, and that's the thing where this idea where you run into the shame room of somebody else and you're confronted by your own shame, right? And she runs through a couple different rooms with respect to that before getting to Bob, and the others basically follow her lead, and this whole idea of like how is this going to end, right? And I had even said that from the trailers and from the TV spots, just looking at what the void was doing and how it was being represented in the film. Like, how in the hell is this group going to deal with that? I mean, okay, a couple of them have super soldier serums, but like, no, this isn't. There's no Thor here. There's no Hulk here. Even like, how are they possibly going to take this guy out? And when it became clear what it was that they had to do, like when she runs in there, it's like, okay, well, clearly this is a case where they have to save Bob. They have to bring Bob out, right? They have to help him overpower this dark side of him in that regard, right? And here's where it hit me. Here's where it got me emotionally, because you've got the whole group in there, and they go through like that one shame room that Bob was in initially, which if I remember correctly, was that the one where his father was abusive and he was defending his mom. I don't remember if it was that one or if it was a different one, but either way, like literally, in trying to figure out, how to get to him, she's like, okay, you said there were other rooms that were worse than this. And he's like, yeah. And she's like, well, take us to the worst rooms. And it's like, okay, so they're going even deeper and they're diving even further into the darker recesses of mental health issues and depression that Bob is going through. And it's all relatable shit. It's all stuff that like any one of us could have experienced in our lives, right? And it gets to that point where, I mean, we already knew from his dossier earlier that Mel had read like, okay, he's depressed, he's had substance abuse issues, he's this, he's that. And they take him back to the lab. He takes them back to the lab where he was first tested, and where the experimentation began, and that's where the void confronts all of them and basically holds the rest of them at bay while just basically convincing Bob, take over, right? And Bob finds the courage and the strength to beat the void down. But here's the thing, is like he's pummeling the void and he's taking out his aggression on the void, and that to me was where the emotions started to hit me, because the idea of beating down your demons, the idea of facing your demons, the idea of striking your demons, the idea of lashing out and projecting your own strength against your inner demons, that is extremely cathartic, and that is like a very relatable thing. But it then became clear to me as seeing how what was happening to him and how Yelena and the others were reacting. Is like, I know exactly how this is going to end. I know what's going to happen. And sure enough, what happened? Yelena, with the help of her father and the others, she gets out and she basically runs to Bob. And the idea is, as he's punching the void is consuming him, and that's a metaphor for the darkness consuming you, the anger, the pain consuming you, and the only thing that's going to bring you out of it is your friends, your family, the people that are close to you, the people that are in your circle. And that's what hit me. That's absolutely what hit me when they all ran up to hug him, and he, like, because he was there and it was overtaking him and he was starting to turn black and it was going to eat him alive. And then they all pulled him away from it. And it was like, no, the strength of the group, this group that's believed in him in the first place, the group that listened to him throughout the film, the group that wanted to save him from the beginning, right? Because they got to know him when they were trapped in the incinerator. They got to know him, and that was what got me. And that was when again, it wasn't a loud cry, it wasn't an ugly cry, it was just tears were streaming down my face. They were, because that's incredible. That is powerful. And for a film like this in the Marvel Cinematic Universe to have an ending like that, right? Again, not a massive CGI fest, not a whole bunch of armies and lasers and explosions all over the place, for it to be personal, for it to literally be the way that we're going to save the day, the way that we're going to save the world, the way that we're going to save existence is we're going to be this guy's friend. We're going to help this guy realize that he's not alone. We're going to help this guy realize that he's stronger with us. He is stronger on the light side rather than giving into the void. Don't let this void tell you that you're nothing. Don't let anybody tell you that you are nothing. You are worth something. You mean something in this world. Find that in yourself. We believe in you. That's what all that was. All that corny shit that people talk about. It's real. It's absolutely real. And there are people out there that absolutely deal with those issues on a regular basis and never have anybody tell them that. Never have anybody defend them like that. Never have anybody pull them out of the depths of the darkness like that. There are tons of people on a regular basis. I've known some in my own life that lost themselves to the darkness and never came back. And this was all about them pulling him back from that darkness and saving him, and in the process, saving everybody else. It is absolutely, in my opinion, probably without a doubt, the most emotional, ending to any of these MCU films. And they've done 36 of these movies. I cannot think of an ending that is more emotional than this, at least from my own personal perspective. And I guarantee people are going to say, well, what about when Yondu died? Or what about what about when Tony died? Yes, I get that. I understand that. I'm saying from a mental health standpoint, to have the audacity, to be daring enough to finally do something like this, to tell a story like this within the Marvel Cinematic Universe, outstanding, and I give them full marks for that. This was incredibly well done. It was very powerful. It was very emotional, and I love every second of it. I'm glad that it exists, and it was a hell of a way to end the movie. And, with respect to the orchestrations of the film, again, the fact that these were all cast-offs that Valentina was trying to destroy, and they come together as a group in hopes of taking her down, and then it becomes less of taking her down and more of saving Bob. So even their whole motivation for what they've teamed up for has changed, right? It's no longer we get vengeance on the woman who tried to kill us. Now it's we have to save another one of her victims from her torture, from her experimentation. Because if we don't, then he's going to be lost in the darkness, and who knows he's going to take with him, right? Like that. But it was all personal, and they all go through their own demons. And like I said, there was a big emotional moment between Yelena and Alexei that was also tear-jerking, for a number of people. And there are moments in this film that hit you, and it's just written and constructed extremely well in that regard. And I applaud them for that. I would never have guessed that this film would have done that this film would have been such an organic progression of events and characterizations the way that it was, right? It wasn't a stilted plot, it wasn't like, okay, well, this is happening and that is happening and we're assembling this team to do this. No, this was happenstance. This was how things coalesced, if you will, and even getting to the end part where Valentina essentially gets away with all of it, gets away with everything, and rebrands them as the new Avengers, which that's the meaning of the asterisk, people, is that Thunderbolts was a placeholder title. It was never meant to be their permanent title. They're now literally considered the new Avengers, and that the beginning of that credit sequence was actually really awesome, with all of the different like newspaper articles and the reports and whatnot. That was really cool. I really liked that, because this again is a part of the structure, if you will, a setup for the rest of this phase of the MCU and the storytelling. And it was like, wow, that was really good. That was really, really well done, and I was not expecting it to go to those levels. I wasn't expecting it to do what it did emotionally, and it's awesome. So, full marks, seriously, to Jake Schreier and Eric Pearson and Joanna Callow, the writers for this. And Eric Pearson wrote the story for this as well. I mean, job well done, seriously. Really, really well done. I have no complaints with the visuals whatsoever. I mean, obviously, I'm sure people are going to go through all the shots with a fine tooth comb and find some blurry VFX here and some not great stuff there, but I didn't see any issues with respect to the visuals. Stu was noting on Friday Flight that they did some very creative things with shadows and how they were playing with the light side and the dark side of things. I thought the way that the void looked was phenomenally creepy. They did a really good job with that, and that was just very simple, playing with shadows and light and dark, and basically upping the contrast on Lewis Pullman as far as him being in the Sentry costume. That was awesome. And the void look visually was also really well done. And it seems simple, but it's like there's not a whole lot to it necessarily, but sometimes the simplest looking stuff is the best looking stuff. I mean, if you're going to portray depression, if you're going to portray the darkness in a visceral, like elemental form, yeah, that was really well done. I really liked how that was orchestrated. All of the stunt work, what they had, all of our intrepid cast do, whether it was Florence or Hannah or Wyatt. There was a story apparently about how Wyatt split his head open, and like there was blood everywhere, so he took his lumps. There was another story about Florence was telling in the press tour about how a scorpion climbed up on her leg, and she was thankful that she was wearing her combat boots because that was what it climbed up on, was the combat boots. So I mean, there was some risking of life and limb, as there is a number of times with some of these actors, with to get the right shot and to get things going. But yeah, visually speaking, I really did not have any issues with how this film was shot. The cinematographer, the DP for this was Andrew Draws Palermo. I'm not familiar with any of his other work, or at least I haven't seen any of his other work. I won't say I'm not familiar with it because I've heard of the Green Knight. People have sung the praises of the Green Knight to me. Apparently, he was the DP for that. He also has done an Adam Wingard film, not the Godzilla movies, but You're Next, apparently, a slasher film that I have heard of and have never seen. He doesn't have a whole lot. Oh, wait. Apparently, he also did 2 episodes of Moon Knight. Okay, there you go. Some in the Suit and the Tomb. Okay, so he is definitely he's no stranger to this in that regard. And listen, I loved Moon Knight. I love the way that show was shot and orchestrated. So yeah, I have no complaints whatsoever with how this one was filmed, and thought it did a really good job of keeping the film at a grounded level, so that it wasn't, too larger than life, and it remained grounded enough for the characters that we had, so that it didn't transcend any of their abilities or any of their personal stories, and any of the chemistry that they were building with each other in that regard. And it also didn't get, like some of the perception stuff that we did, that he did with the shame rooms and the angles and the mirrors and all that. Like, no, I really like that. Like there's a lot of kind of twisty stuff that isn't quite so twisty, because it's really, again, just showing a personification of the mental health issues and depression within this film. And I think they do a lot of great things to really put you in that moment, and to really make it feel like that's what these characters are dealing with, and to really make it relatable on that level, and kind of keep them off balance at times here and there. Like, they're never all fully put together in that regard, and I think they did a really good job of orchestrating that and representing that visually. So yeah, I no complaints whatsoever visually with respect to this film. I love the music in this film. Love, love, love the music for it. And, instead of piling on with a bunch of needle drops and, familiar songs that we all have known from pop culture, no, they went experimental with this. They brought in Sun Lux, which is the American experimental band. Let's see, it's Ryan Lott and also Rafik Bhatia and Ian Chang. this is the group that did Everything Everywhere All at Once, right? They did the music for that particular film, and I think that earned them a nomination for Best Original Score for the Academy Awards a couple of years ago, right? And this work here, I mean, honestly, when we talk about, like, there's very much a Zimmer quality with respect to this, but really, I would liken this to Atticus Ross and Trent Reznor and the stuff that they've done for David Fincher. You know, Gone Girl comes to mind, but certainly The Social Network as well, and a couple of other things. But like, and also Dragon Tattoo. I think Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, Fincher's version of that, if I remember correctly. But they consider this genre to be electronica, experimental, post rock, and I think it fits this film really well because, again, when you center it around depression, when you center it around characters dealing with mental health issues, and you put it in the world of superheroes, you have to have something that is atmospheric. You have to have something that is a little bit ethereal, something that really speaks to the core essence of what these characters are trying to fight through and what these characters are representing in this regard. And I really like how this score definitely gives an orchestral vibe. This is one of those movies that I feel like orchestral vibes and instrumental, I guess is a better way to put it. Instrumental vibes are what is best suited for a film like this. I think that if you were to fill this film with a bunch of needle drops, that it would take a lot of that seriousness away, right? And the idea is you're not going to be 100% like deadly serious throughout, but you definitely have to have music for those more serious parts. It has to be more of a balance in that regard. And I think that, you know, this is nothing against what James Gunn has done with the Guardians films. It's nothing, or the Suicide Squad. It's nothing against even the needle drops that they had in David Ayer's film, you know, whether it's Studio Squad or his original Ayer cut that hopefully we'll one day see, you know, at some point, who knows. But like, it's nothing against needle drops in general. It's just that for a film like this, I'm glad they went instrumental. I'm glad that they went experimental. I'm glad that they did something that was definitely more atmospheric and more environmental, and something that supports what we're seeing and supports the characterizations on screen more in an instrumental sense and in an industrialized sense in many ways. I really, really dug this score, and you know, I that's one of the things, like, that when I rewatch this movie over again, and I don't know that I'll get to the theater to see it, but I most certainly will own it. I will look forward to hearing more of those cuts and really kind of immersing myself in that soundtrack, which is available on Apple Music and whatnot. Let's see, how many tracks is it? Wow, 32. 32 tracks. Yeah, some good stuff here. I'm a sucker for good film scores, and yeah, this is a really good film score. I think it fit the film extremely well, and just even more so goes into more of the type of experimental nature of what this film does within the framework of the MCU, as far as and also with respect to, you know, shared cinematic universe comic book movies in general. Definitely, this is a hallmark. This is a really good one. And so my final thoughts on Thunderbolts is that I seriously do consider it to be high-tier MCU. I think it is one of the strongest films that the franchise has done in its 17-plus year history. How high did I rank it in the high tier? I told you it's not in the mid tier, and it's certainly nowhere near the low tier. So, and we know already, I've told you that it bumped Avengers Endgame and Captain America Brave New World down a spot, but it did not touch Captain America the Winter Soldier. So here, I'll tell you what. I'll rattle off the first 5 of these movies that are in my top tier of the MCU. Number 1, Captain America the Winter Soldier. Number 2, Iron Man, the first Iron Man film. Number 3, Avengers Infinity War. Number 4, Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings. Number 5, Black Panther. Number 6 is where I have Thunderbolts. Yep, that's right. That means that I have put, just to further shock a number of you, I'm sure I have, and we're going to have arguments about this, I know, but that means that I put it ahead of Spider-Man Homecoming, I put it ahead of Captain America the First Avenger, I put it ahead of the first Avengers film, I put it ahead of Deadpool and Wolverine, I put it ahead of Guardians Volume 3, and I put it ahead of Spider-Man No Way Home. And I'm going to just go ahead and give you a rationale with respect to this. Again, with respect to what this film does and how this film tells a story about characters in the superhero realm dealing with mental health and depression, the way that it does it, the way that it presents it, the organic nature of how it is assembled, and just the chemistry that these actors have, everything all together, to me, is a stronger body of work than those other films that I listed. And that is not to say that those other films are just not as good, they're not good films all of a sudden. No, this is my top tier. My top tier is Winter Soldier, Iron Man, Infinity War, Shang-Chi, Black Panther, Thunderbolts, No Way Home, Guardians Volume 3, Deadpool and Wolverine, Avengers, the first Avengers film, Captain America, the First Avenger, and Spider-Man: Homecoming. That is my top tier. That is the creme de la creme of the Marvel Cinematic Universe for me, right? In the order that I just listed. And I think Thunderbolts is that strong of an entry. I do. I think it's that daring of an entry, and it's that powerful of an entry because, again, to tell a story like that, I mean, all those other movies that I listed have massively huge third act, like climax battles, like at the end, right? Like big, huge set pieces. Okay, nothing is necessarily understated. Even in the case of Shang-Chi, that's a giant dragon and a battle between him and his father for command of the 10 rings, right? There's a big, huge climactic ending to Deadpool and Wolverine and Guardians Volume 3. And all of these have big, huge climactic endings. Thunderbolts, not so much. I mean, it has a huge climactic ending, but it's a personal story. It's a big story. It's not, like a shoot 'em up at the end. It's not a CGI fest at the end. And I really give it a great deal of credit for doing something like that with a big budget film like this, a bigger budget film like this. The budget for Thunderbolts is 180 million, and as of now, I can bring the box office into this. It has currently made, according to Box Office Mojo, it took them forever to update these numbers, but it has currently made $162.1 million worldwide. That's 76 million domestically in the US, 86.1 million internationally. So it's well on its way to making its budget back, its production budget in that regard, which again, we're talking about financial success. Those are the numbers that I look at with respect to that, and mind you, it's doing all of this while Sinners is still doing well in theaters, right? Like Shonda just went and saw it a second time and reported back that her theater, even in its third weekend, still pretty well full with respect to people going to see Sinners. So that movie is still succeeding. Thunderbolts is finding its own success, probably with no doubt, be number one for the box office this opening weekend. And as word of mouth continues for this film, and it's been getting strong reviews, critics like it, the audience likes it. All the emotional threads, all the moments that can hit the general audience and any one of us at any point in time watching this film, yeah, it's going to succeed. It's going to do well. It's already succeeding, and it's a film that I think definitely deserves that level of success because I applaud them telling a story like this. I applaud them, getting more personal with the superhero subject matter like this and telling a story that is very relatable, and I mean very relatable to anybody in this country, to anybody in our world that we live in, our society today. Like, look, if you are like that critic that said, hey, Marvel shouldn't expect me to relate to depression because I can't. Hey, you know what? More power to you. I don't believe you. I don't. I don't believe you. But hey, more power to you if everything is just 1000% happy in your world and you don't know depression in any form. I tend to think you're lying. I tend to think that you're hiding it, and you're not hiding it as well as the rest of us are. The rest of us, I don't think necessarily try to hide it. I think this film plays to, has a lot of themes and plays to a lot of emotions that a lot of people can relate to and a lot of people can share. And it'll end up being, in my opinion, one of the most relatable superhero films in the shared cinematic universe era that we could have, in my opinion. Like just me looking at it. And I realize I'm heaping a lot of praise on it, but it's been a minute since I've heaped this kind of praise on an MCU film. And, I think it deserves it. I really do. I think this one does transcend into the very good, if not great category, which is why I've placed it so high. I have it sixth. That means there are 30 other MCU movies that I think are not as good as Thunderbolts. Even though I think they're still good because I largely still very much enjoy the vast majority of the MCU. And again, my Brave New World pre-order will come in, and when the Thunderbolts pre-order starts for the Steelbook, I will absolutely pre-order that. That will come in. It will become part of my collection, no doubt about it. And I will keep my ranking where it is to this point in time. But no, I thoroughly enjoyed it. I thought it was an excellent film. Really, really well done. And, I'll talk briefly here about the post-credit scenes. I mean, obviously the mid-credit scene was a funny joke with Alexei and the Wheaties box and, him trying to get noticed by that woman, that he was on the box of Wheaties because now the new Avengers are on the Wheaties and all that. Yeah, no, that was funny. I'm not saying Red Guardian wasn't funny at all. It's just, that type of humor is very subjective for me and, doesn't always hit for me in that regard. That's all I'm saying with respect to that stuff. But yeah, so there was the funny scene, and then the post-credit scene, any one of us paying attention to this point could have seen that coming. The post-credit scene, of course, which is, it's been however long since the new Avengers have, been prominent, and they're in the Watchtower, which I didn't mention that earlier, that Valentina's the one that clearly bought Avengers Tower, and now it's called the Watchtower, which I'm sure there's some history of Marvel calling something the Watchtower. That's not just a DC and a Justice League thing. I'm sure Jared or somebody, please point that out if that is the case, or if this is a new thing that the MCU has decided to do, whichever. But they're in there and they're talking about how Sam Wilson is, the trademarks over the name, and he's assembled his own team. There's some big catastrophe happening in space, which obviously has to do with the multiverse saga. And then, of course, the satellites detect the entrance of a space vehicle entering orbit. And sure enough, what is it? A rocket with the number 4 on the side. Yes, indeed, the arrival of the Fantastic Four, which, of course, we already knew. Because Fantastic Four First Steps, of course, is going to happen in a different multiverse. It will not take place on the same Earth that MCU Prime, the 616 Earth, is on, right? So in July, we're going to go to a whole different Earth, but then they're going to be transported to the 616 Earth, and clearly that is when, right? That is how, like via that rocket. So to me, it works perfectly as a setup. It's just like how, I forget what it was, like, we're like at the end of Iron Man 2, we saw Thor's hammer in the desert. Coulson found Thor's hammer in the desert. That was like a direct lead into the Thor movie, which was next on the docket, right? Same thing here. This is a direct lead into Fantastic Four First Steps, which is the next movie, the third and final movie of 2025 on the docket for the MCU. So definitely looking forward to that. Definitely love the tease for that for sure. And yeah, you know what? Hey, Marvel's 2 for 2 for me so far this year, and I mean, that's not a surprise because very rarely am I going to just massively dislike any of their films or any of these comic book films, to be honest with you. But yeah, definitely one of the strongest entries to the MCU franchise, in my humble, subjective opinion. You all can agree or disagree with me on that as much as you like. I'm sure we'll get into it and we'll dive into it further as more of you have seen the film and as we get into some spoiler conversation on the next episode of Friday Flight. But count me as one of those that thoroughly enjoyed Thunderbolts. The MCU is not back because it never left. I have enjoyed a good portion of Phase 4 and 5, and you know what? This is one of the stronger entries, and I think probably at this point, not the strongest entry in Phase 4 or 5, as John was pointing out, because he was a bit harsher with respect to his review. But I do agree that I would put Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings ahead of this particular film for a number of reasons, but still, Thunderbolts, excellent, excellent movie. And that is going to do it for this episode of Flight Review, my spoiler-filled, honest thoughts on Thunderbolts. Thank you so much for listening to the show. Thank you so much for supporting the Flightcast. If any of you have seen this film and you want to share your thoughts with respect to what you thought about it, are you with me? Do you think of it as highly, or do you not think of it as highly? I'm sure many of you probably feel like my ranking is a little too high for that, and you most certainly would not even think of putting it ahead of some of the other MCU films that I put it ahead of. But hey, it's all subjective, and that's where having the honest and subjective discussion about it comes into play. So if you want to share your thoughts about this particular film or anything else related to movies, TV, and other assorted media, you know where to find me on Threads at The Flightcast, on Instagram at The Flightcast, on BLUESKY at Flightcast. There's the Flightcast YouTube page that you can comment under the post for this particular review on as well. There's also the Flightcast Facebook page, and of course I can be reached by email at ray@theflightcast.com. All right, take care, stay safe out there, and I will see you all next time. Take it easy.